They say the apocalypse would come with fire and thunder. They were wrong. It came quietly. A cough, a fever, then silence, the kind that swallows entire cities whole. His name is JEID, 25 years old, and on day one of the end of the world, while everyone else was running, he stopped. He thought. In every catastrophe, 90% of people react. 10% respond. JEID had always been that 10%, the kind of man who plays chess while others play checkers. And now, that mind was the most important weapon he had. Right there, in the ruins of a world that had forgotten how to think, JEID made himself one promise. He would survive. Not by luck, not by chance, but by design. It started on a Tuesday. JEID was at work when the emergency broadcasts began. He didn't panic. He did what he always did. He observed, assessed, and acted. Most survivors made their first mistake in the first hour. They moved without looking. JEID's first rule was iron. Never move until you know what's in front of you. JEID had prepped that bag months before the world ended. He'd called it paranoia back then. Now he called it salvation. Your first shelter isn't about comfort, it's about control. JEID knew this. He needed elevation, limited entry points, and proximity to resources, not a fancy bed. By day 2, food was already a calculation, not a luxury, a fuel source. JEID burned calories on movement, so movement had to earn its keep. JEID studied them like a scientist studying a new species. No emotion, just data. And data, properly understood, kept you alive. Day 3. The grocery store was 2 blocks away. Simple in theory, deadly in practice. JEID had planned this run 12 times in his head before his feet hit the stairs. The store was a graveyard of the old world. Half-empty shelves, overturned displays, a shopping cart on its side like a fallen soldier. But JEID wasn't looking for what was easy to find. He was looking for what others had missed. Food you could ration. Water you could not. JEID knew the 3-day rule by heart. 3 days without water and your body starts failing you. He refused to let that happen. A smart survivor doesn't just react to threats. He designs a system that warns him before the threat arrives. JEID built his first early warning system on day 3 with nothing but string and empty cans. That black journal was more than paper and ink. It was his operating system, every observation, every route, every risk assessment cataloged and cross-referenced. The journal didn't just record his survival, it drove it. He saw the others fail in real time. A man who ran straight down the middle of the street, gone in seconds. A woman who lit a fire in a building lobby, drew a horde within minutes. Every mistake JEID witnessed was a lesson he absorbed and swore never to repeat. Survival is physical only half the time. The other half is fought entirely in your head. JEID knew that panic was more deadly than any zombie, and he had built his mental protocol long before the world broke. By day 4, JEID had established his first principle of movement. Always scout before you commit. Never enter a space you haven't mapped with your eyes first. Day 4's mission. The hardware store. Rope, duct tape, tarps, tools, wire. Things that most survivors wouldn't think to want until they desperately needed them. And by then, it was too late. Smart survival isn't just about staying alive today, it's about engineering a better tomorrow. JEID came home from the hardware store and got to work. On day 5, everything changed. Not a zombie, not a small group. A horde, hundreds of them, moving in a slow, terrible tide through the city's main boulevard. JEID had anticipated this. He called it the migration. Not every plan works perfectly. JEID would be the first to admit that. On day 5, a wrong turn nearly cost him everything. JEID had cracked the zombie code early, They were prisoners of sound. They moved toward it like moths to a flame. He would use that against them every single time. JEID was smart. He was tactical. But he was also human. And in the silence between plans, the weight of what the world had become pressed down on him like a physical thing. Medicine wasn't optional. An infected cut, a fever left unchecked, these killed as surely as any zombie. On day 6, JEID added a pharmacy to his mission roster. By day 6, JEID had mapped 4 distinct operational routes through the surrounding 6-block radius. Each route had a primary path and a fallback. He never traveled the same way twice in a row. He had avoided other survivors intentionally. People were unpredictable, panicked, desperate, dangerous. But on day 6, the choice was taken away from him. JEID had learned that zombies were more dangerous in the day, more of them active, more unpredictable. At night, movement became an art of absolute silence and zero light emission. Survival required a body that could perform on demand. JEID maintained his physical conditioning inside the shelter. Silent, systematic, daily. Your body was the first piece of equipment that had to be kept operational. Day 7. The end of his first week. Most people who were going to die had already died. JEID was still here. Not by accident, by architecture. He had barely had time to breathe. The horde he had tracked since day 5 had changed course. It was moving toward his sector, and it was bigger than before. He had planned for this. The evacuation protocol was in the journal, page 14. He had written it on day 2. Now he was executing it exactly as written. Route Delta was his most dangerous path, but it was also the fastest. And with a horde 10 hours behind him, speed outweighed caution. The secondary shelter was better. JEID had always known it was better. Higher floor, better sightlines, a rooftop access ladder 3 doors down. He had planned to move here eventually. The horde had just accelerated the timeline. Then he watched it. The thing that had driven him from his first home. The horde moved through the city below like a dark tide, slow and inevitable. It was both terrifying and, in a strange way, clarifying. It wasn't the horde that nearly killed him. It was a single zombie in a place he thought was clear. The most dangerous assumption in the apocalypse. Assuming safe means empty. He sat with what had happened for exactly 5 minutes. Then he converted it into protocol. And then, on the roof, he found something he hadn't planned for. Something that changed his calculus for everything that came after. There it was. The question every survivor eventually faced. Stay alone, stay in control, or seek out others and accept the unpredictability that came with them. JEID ran the calculation. 12 blocks north. It could be salvation, it could be a trap. Either way, JEID would approach it the only way he approached anything. With a plan so tight, there was no room for failure. The 12-block route was its own gauntlet. Every block was a decision. Every corner was a question. But JEID moved through the city like a surgeon, precise, intentional, leaving no trace. From the shadows of a parking structure across the street, JEID watched. What he saw was complicated. The return was when it all went wrong. Because JEID hadn't been the only one watching the community center. Something else had too. He came home that night and sat in the dark for an hour, not from fear, from calculation. He had almost been caught. He had escaped, but barely. That was a data point he could not ignore. The community center note burned a hole in his pocket. People, resources, risk, possibility. JEID had always operated alone by philosophy, and now that philosophy was being tested by something deeper than logic. He didn't walk toward the community center empty-handed or empty-headed. He walked toward it with a full plan, a full pack, and the crystal-clear understanding of what he brought to the table and what he wouldn't tolerate. He knocked on the front gate of the community center at exactly 0900 hours. 3 slow knocks, exactly as the sign instructed. He had read the sign. He followed the protocol. Because even in someone else's territory, systems mattered. He stepped inside with his eyes open. Every face, every supply stack, every exit point cataloged in the first 90 seconds. Old habits don't die because you found other people. They become more important. He didn't ask to belong. He proposed a partnership. There was a difference, and JEID made sure that difference was understood. That night, surrounded by other people for the first time in a week, JEID still sat with his back to the wall, still kept his backpack beside him, still listened to every sound. Some things don't change, some things shouldn't. The sun rose on day 8, and JEID rose with it. Same time as always, same protocol as always. Some things change, the discipline never does. 7 days. That was all it took to go from survivor to strategist. And in a world where most people had already fallen, JEID had built the architecture of something that would outlast the chaos. If there was a philosophy to how JEID survived, it could be distilled into 5 principles. 5 rules that separated the 10% from the 90% in a world that had run out of second chances. Week 1 was the proof that a prepared mind, a disciplined body, and a tactical approach could survive what the world had become. Week 2 would ask harder questions, deeper risks, and bigger stakes. They say that in the end, survival comes down to luck. JEID would disagree. Luck is just preparation meeting opportunity, and he had spent his whole life preparing for an opportunity he hoped would never come. When it did, he was ready. If you're watching this, you already have what JEID had. Not the backpack, not the journal, the mind, the willingness to think before you act, to prepare before you need, to observe before you move. The apocalypse tests everything, but it can't touch a prepared mind. Stay smart, stay tactical, stay alive.